Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
I think I've done my best to get the youth pastor look going today. Got the white shoes, got the his long pants, the t-shirt, short sleeve. So as Kathleen's already said, my wife Tara and I have been coming here for the past couple of years. Loved every moment of it. Loved the entire community so much. And also this all leads to the communion table at the end of the service that we'll all be sharing in together as well. So on that point, basically a little bit about my social media habits is that I follow a few progressive Christian social media pages, and so if you've done that, like me, you've probably come across this particular post, which is Judas 8:2. So the story of Judas for me has always been a really interesting one. So commonly people have a pretty bitter taste in their mouth when they think of Judas, like they go, oh, that guy's such a Judas or whatever, and it's like, it's a massive insult. And, pretty understandably as well, betrayed Jesus to his death. But I always had a bit of a sense of empathy towards Judas. Like the actual figure of Judas, if you think about it, is quite a tragic one in a lot of ways. Because knowing that he had betrayed, his best friend and mentor in Jesus to his death, he had experienced the most bitter and internal turmoil. Like after he knew what he had done, the gravity had actually hit him so hard. He met a really sad and tragic end. I mean, surely Jesus would have wept as he saw the situation unfold. Jesus would have known all about the situation as happening. And still Jesus loved him in this very moment, as he loved him in every single moment of his life. So looking back at the moments before the betrayal, though, as well, Jesus had dined with Judas. This was a sign of deep connection, respect, and love. But the really interesting thing on this as well is that Jesus knew that Judas had already betrayed him. He knew that he'd already gone to, the authorities and had basically set the trap, so to speak. But Jesus dined with him anyway. He loved him anyway. He still invited him into this intimate and to this loving situation with his closest and nearest and dearest. Jesus knew this as well for Peter. He knew that he would also deny him as well before the night was over. He'd spent his last free moments with them. And imagine that. Imagine knowing somebody who betrayed you so deeply and knowing that you have only a few free moments left before you'd be tortured and killed, and still spending and still showing love and grace to that person anyway. So as we sit on this thought, I think it might bring a different perspective to what it means to come to the table. The table is not only a place where we come to receive the elements, but is also a reminder that Jesus, who knows our deepest being, loves us and dines with us anyway, even when we have moments where we might be a Judas or a Peter type of character. Jesus knows our deepest being and loves us anyway. Though we don't know everything about everybody, we can still love, knowing that the God who loves us loves all of us too, more than we can ever know. Thank you, Kathleen.
If you don't know me, I'm Trav, and it's a real privilege to be speaking here at Westcity today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share, and it's significant for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that, particularly being part of this Homebrew piece, Emily and I began attending Westcity last year during the Homebrew series, and I think we caught a real glimpse of the heart of the people in this community, especially those who were sharing over those weeks. Probably, right from the get-go when Josh shared his playlist, still remember it, and he said Ray Charles was up there, that I kind of felt like I was at home. So we were just checking out Westcity at that point, getting a sense of the heart of you as a community and the love that you have for Jesus, the depth of thought that we were hearing from the front as people shared was really special. And I think we were surprised by how quickly we could feel ourselves relaxing into this refreshing and safe community that Westcity is. And the surprise of it was probably because we were coming in pretty tender-hearted, a little bit parched and somewhat disoriented. I was saying to Rob Price over coffee just the other week, I actually couldn't get through the closing benediction for about 2 months. It had this healing sting to it. Bit like, when you're a kid and you get a gravel graze and you're getting cleaned up with peroxide or something, and you kind of know, you're being told it's right and it's good and it's needed, but it hurts like hell all the same. And saying the go of Christ at the end of each service was a lot like that for me. It was sort of the peroxide for the grazes and the bruises that I was carrying emotionally. And for about 8 weeks, I reckon, I would just choke up to the point of not being able to speak and just hot tears just running down my face. And I remember actually the week I got through it for the first time. And it was kind of old reference, but it was my Anchorman moment right at the start of Anchorman, where he's like, "Hey, everybody, come see how good I look." I kind of wanted to call out, "Hey, everybody, I made it through without crying and without hardening my heart," which was pretty important. So participating in this homebrew is really, really special. Feels like a coming of full circle in some ways. And the second reason why it's significant is because, connected to the first and to the text that we'll look at in a moment, is that this is the first time in 18 months that I've spoken in a church. I actually didn't think I'd speak again, said to Kathleen before the service. I thought that part of my life had died. And yet here I am, surprised by resurrection rhythms yet again. The third reason today is significant is that some 63 years ago, almost to the week, my grandfather, Harold Richard Fitch, was welcomed here at Wembley Church of Christ as the minister, where for about 2 years he would have likely stood at the other end of this chapel when the church faced in the other direction, and he preached each week for a couple of years. And Harold, or HR as he was known, who I'm pictured with here on the other side, would later go on to have a successful career as the face of Mr. Sheen. So there you go. Anyway, we've got some ground to cover this morning, and so let's dive straight into this the text that I would like us to have in focus today. If you have a Bible or a phone, I invite you to head to the fourth biography of Jesus' life, known as the Gospel of John, and we'll be in chapter 20. And while you're looking that up, a bit of a fun fact about this book: while it's called the Gospel of John in our Bibles, scholars actually don't really know who wrote it. One of my favourite theologians, who is a guy whose name I think either predestined him to write theology or have a cameo in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Ben Witherington III, puts forward a pretty compelling theory in his book that the author of this particular biography, and also the letters at the end of our New Testament, John 1, 2 and 3, is none other. And I remember being down at Augusta reading this book, reading this chapter, and he just writes this particular chapter so beautifully. It's suspenseful, and he says, and it's almost like it builds to this crescendo, and there's a drum roll, and the author of the fourth gospel is Lazarus. And I'm like, what? So if you're interested in that, it's in that book how he gets there. He's not putting it as a hard solid. I mean, it's just this is where he lands with that idea. But I thought it was very interesting that the beloved disciple is the one that Jesus wept over and is the author of the fourth biography. Anyway, for our purposes, we're in John 20, verses 19 to 29. Fun fact number 2 about just this particular chapter is that this section's actually considered, so chapter 20 is actually considered to be the final chapter of the fourth biography of the Gospel of John. Chapter 21 is held to be a later edition. And that makes sense when you see some of the themes that come through in chapter 20. It's like a full circle coming on the themes that are introduced in chapter 1, introduced there. So what do we do with chapter 21? Well, I think of chapter 21 a little bit like, you know, those closing epilogue credits at the end of a movie just before the rolling credits. You know, the sort where Jill went on to buy the vegan coffee shop she always dreamed of, and Ted finally quit his burlesque dancing gig in Las Vegas to farm chickens in Louisiana. So that kind of, you know, now obviously chapter 21 holds a whole lot more meaning than Ted farming chickens and poultry in free range. So we are at the thematic bookend of John's biography here, and we step into the story on the Sunday following Jesus' crucifixion and burial. And I simply want to read this text and then make some observations along the way. Some pictures within the picture that caught my attention and speak to my heart, and I hope something catches your eye and that God, through God's Spirit, speaks to you in the way that you most need. All right, let's read. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked, notice that, with the doors locked. Got the text there, sorry. For fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Shalom aleichem in Hebrew. Shalom, peace. Aleichem be with you. And after he said this, he showed them his hands and side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of anyone, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them, though the doors were locked. There it is again. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who've not seen and yet believed." So Jesus has been crucified and then laid in a tomb. And we enter this story at a point of immense grief and confusion and fear. And this group of people who followed Jesus and loved Jesus are in what we might call the Saturday space, that space between Jesus' death on Good Friday and his resurrection on Sunday. Except they don't know. They don't have that capacity to understand or grasp or believe or think that resurrection or new life or something renewed is even possible. You're just in the marsh of loss and grief and confusion and disorientation. They don't know Sunday's coming. They're just firmly in the Saturday space. Hebrew Bible scholar Walter Brueggemann, who I incidentally think sounds like the Looney Tunes character Yosemite Sam. So if you can ever dig out, it's just, even if you don't understand what he's saying, it's just a great listen. It's just nice on the ears. Anyway, he describes this pattern of life, death, and resurrection as orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. Richard Rohr describes it as order, disorder, reorder. But I find Brueggemann really helpful at this point. Orientation, this sense that I know where I am. You know, my feet feel grounded. I feel secure and safe. I have my people. I have a sense of God and God's good presence. But then all of a sudden, I get thrust into unexpectedly some kind of event and an experience of disorientation, where now I'm wondering, what's going on? Where am I? Who are my people? Where is God? Am I safe? How long is this going to last? Will this ever end? In May 2023, just going to grab a drink of water. In May 2023, we, Emily and I, and probably shouldn't have used that photo. Okay, so we found ourselves, and our kids found ourselves in a season of real disorientation. It was a space of blackness that it was pretty traumatic at some points, and it was for a number of reasons. There were a number of events in this season that seemed to just go on. But initially, it was around our daughter's health, and it had felt like. Well, I remember texting Gav Carroll. I was in the car park at Warwick Stadium, and I texted him and just said, I feel like I'm disappearing down this black hole, and I don't know how to get out. And it felt like we had been just picked up and dumped by the surf. You know that feeling where you don't know where up is, and you're just wondering when you're going to be able to break the surface of that soup of salt water and sand just to catch your breath. And on this occasion, it wasn't a physical loss of someone, which I think is important to name, because the grief space, the Saturday space, isn't solely reserved for when we physically lose someone in our lives. It is acutely experienced when we lose someone physically in our lives, but it's not the only thing that takes us there. It shows up when we experience loss spread across various domains in life. The loss of relationship, a job, a marriage, the loss of our mobility, of community, a belief system that becomes unstitched, an identity that we have been known for or shaped, a position or role that we hold, a house that we owned. A couple of text messages that from this time that maybe give you a sense of how I and others were trying to language some of this experience. One between me and my brother-in-law, Tim. He said, totally get it. Feels like an emotional threshold you'd rather not cross. Hard to trust she'll get good care, but what else can you do? Wish you and she didn't have to go through this. Effing valley of shadows, brother. Me, yeah, sure is. Tim, but this too shall pass. Me, yeah, I know that deep down, thanks. Tim, it never feels like it in the moment, but it happens. Stones move and light returns. Stones move and light returns. Then one with our friend Rochelle, where I wrote in response to a text, that beautiful text she'd sent me. I said, this is just to stabilise my footing in a way I've not experienced, to the point where I can type, but I struggle to talk, where all I want is to be alone. It's like the last shadows of joy have been swallowed by the night, even despite one good thing happening. I'm just objectively trusting that the sun of a new day always breaks the dark. I couldn't connect with that idea emotionally, but I'm just objectively trusting right now that the sun of a new day always breaks the dark. I can only imagine that if Jesus' disciples had phones, maybe this is something of what they might be messaging about how they were feeling as they had locked themselves in that room that first Sunday. And you know what? I get the desire to be locked away. That reaction makes a whole lot of sense to me. It's kind of like this declaration that I don't ever want to be exposed to that level of vulnerability again. I don't want to ever lose like that again, or be at the risk of losing like that again. I don't want to ever go through that sort of bruising or pain, not even be in the radar for it. And so I'm going to lock the door and I'm going to batten down the hatches. But then, beautifully, in the story, what do we see? There is one who bypasses the locks. One of the things I value really deeply about this detail is that twice in the narrative, the disciples lock the door. And twice in the story, Jesus bypasses the locks. The words from Tim's text come back to me at this point. It never feels like it in the moment, but it happens. Stones move and light returns. One of the things that cracks me up about this story is Jesus' first words to them. He says to them in Hebrew, Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you, which is our modern day way of simply saying hi, hello, morning. Quite unexpectedly, quite unspectacularly, this tight bubble of grief, this locked away enclave of sorrow and disorientation and confusion and question is perforated by a simple hello. Hello. The hello of the resurrected Jesus. There's a couple of things that capture my attention about this moment. First, it's Jesus, but it's Jesus different. He's physical, he's tangible, he's touchable, he's interactive, he speaks and he can be audibly heard, and he listens and he makes eye contact, just like he did before his death. But now he's different. He can bypass the locks. He's beyond physical. He didn't unlock the door. He got through. And at this point, I think there's something important here about the nature of resurrection, about what happens when stones move and light returns. See, the nature of resurrection, I think, is that things we thought were dead seem to retain something of what we've lost, but they've been transformed, altered in some surprising and life-giving way. as the song says, in Jesus we love you, things we thought were dead are breathing new life again. You cause your sun to shine on darkest nights. My only caveat to that lyric is I don't think what comes to life is the exact return of what was lost. I think what comes to life retains aspects of what was lost, but it also shows up in a transformed way. It's been reshaped in some surprising, mysterious, life-giving way. The second thing I notice about this, especially as I reluctantly crawl my way to the age of 50, is that this story reminds me of what I'm becoming more and more familiar with as a cosmic rhythm, so to speak, a cosmic rhythm of life. And it is that pattern of life, death, and resurrection. It's a rhythm that beats its way through the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. It's a rhythm that then winds its way through the New Testament. It finds its climax in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. We experience it woven into the very fabric of creation, into seasons, life, death, and new life, and into our own human experiences. And maybe some of us might find Walter Brueggemann's language helpful here. Orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. There are seasons of orientation where we know where we are. Our feet feel sure. We have our people. We feel secure and safe. We have a sense of God and God's good presence. And then there are seasons where we are unexpectedly thrust into disorientation, where all of a sudden we're wondering, how did I end up here? What is going on? Who are my people? Where is God? Am I safe? Will this ever end? Will I ever find my feet again? And then to our surprise, stones move and light returns. And we find our feet. We slowly stir to a new morning, or maybe we suddenly wake to a season of reorientation. We discover once more that the sun of a new day truly does break the dark. It's just that some nights feel long, don't they? They feel longer than others. To those of you who are in a season of disorientation at the moment, all I can say is it's hard, isn't it? It's hard. But I want to offer you the words of earthy hope that helped ground me. It never feels like it in the moment, but it does happen. Stones move, light returns. The Christ who bypassed the locks in John 20 will bypass the locks again. And he will meet you. He will meet you quite unspectacularly with his good morning. Morning. Hello. Now, I was going to stop there. There's just one more picture that I just want to draw your attention to very briefly before we come to the table, because it speaks to how we might rise in resurrection. Because the thing I notice about this picture is that Jesus rises with his wounds. It's the central piece to the Thomas thread of this story. He says, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it in my side. Jesus' wounds aren't covered over so that no one can see them, but they're also not festering and angry. Somehow, beyond a description of biology and mechanics and steps and metaphysics, we're simply left with the result of the Spirit that raised Jesus to life again, raised Jesus with his wounds, open and healed. And I think there's a profound invitation here. As we navigate our death moments and our moments of disorientation, times that are often accompanied by wounding and abrasion and damage and piercing and trauma, each in their own ways, each to their own degrees, where things haven't worked out as we'd hoped or dreamed or planned, and we feel like part of us is forever missing. I wonder what it means for us to rest in those moments, in the loving embrace of God through the Spirit, so that we might find ourselves raised up and walking again, albeit with open and healed wounds. Not covering our wounds and concealing them as if they're not there. Not reprimanding ourselves or demanding that they should have disappeared by now. But neither are they festering and angry, toxic through ongoing infection. I wonder what it means to walk out of Saturday spaces with open and healed wounds. And I think it has a whole lot to do with resting and surrendering to the love of God, which may just practically mean and begin with a text message that gently reminds us that stones move and light returns. Or maybe it's allowing someone to hold space for us in our grief and in our disorientation. I wonder how we might continue as a church to courageously create room for that kind of open wound honesty. Because let's face it, a hole in the side, even if it's healed, is still pretty confronting. It takes courage. And I wonder how we cultivate and continue to cultivate being a community that walks with open and healed wounds and even dares to invite people to put their hand in so that they can see who we truly are. And with that in mind, we come to the table. I want to invite the servers to come forward and the musicians. The table is a return destination. At the invitation of Jesus, to those of us who feel grounded and connected and secure, as well as those who feel like we've been picked up and dumped by a wave in the surf, and we don't know where up is. It's for those whose wounds are raw, for those whose wounds are in the process of healing, you who feel the sting of the benediction or a song that we've sung, you who are still here even though it hurts like hell. It's for those of you who are not sure what it means to let your wounds breathe, and for those whose wounds are more healed and open. This is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. It's made ready for those who love God and for those who want to love God more. So come, you who have much faith and you who have little, you who have been here often and you who have come for the first time, you who have tried to follow and you who have failed, come. Because it is the Lord who invites you. It is God's will that those who want Christ should meet him here.
How good was that message? Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at West City, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.